Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 10, Monday Night Football edition. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, but unlike most Mondays around these parts, I am not joined by Payne Insider, who's a little bit under the weather. Still no doubt out celebrating Florida State's big win, albeit in a non-cover against Miami, somewhere in South Florida for his beloved Seminoles. Billy Attridge steps into the hot seat to join me on the program. And Billy, we couldn't ask for a better night for you to come in on a Monday so you can tell us all about your Bills, but we'll get there towards the end of the program. How goes it, my friend?
Goes great. Can't wait to talk about some 2023 exciting Bills football, seeing as we've had a wonderful season thus far. This will be a fun one, bud.
Hey, you know what? Credit to the Bills. They at least have more wins than it feels like I have in my betting account so far this fall. I know the loyal listeners out there ran to social media to remind us of that dominant first-half performance from Josh Dobbs. Of course, we get 3 points from the Minnesota Vikings in the second half, but no sense crying over spilled milk. We continue to fight the good fight and turn this NFL best bet ship around. But for those folks keeping score at home across college and pro football in the weekly best bets, still one game over 500. I'll be it down a little bit. We're not here to sugarcoat, though, but I wanted to address that at the top. We'll get right into some of the things that we saw unfold over the weekend. And Billy, what better place to start than that tremendous Sunday night football game with an offensive display from Aiden O'Connell on one side, Zach Wilson on the other. The Jets fight tooth and nail, but as we figured watching that first half, if you're getting into the red zone, you're consistently kicking field goals, eventually it's going to come back to haunt you. And lo and behold, you get a touchdown reception for the Raiders, given a next-gen probability of 27%, but so is the season for the New York Jets.
Yeah, when you're playing a football team like the Raiders, who have decided to, as Antonio Pierce said, we're going to build our organization around Robert Spillane at linebacker. That's where we're going to build our defense around. He's the man. And sure enough, about 4 plays later, he gets the game-ending interception. We watched these two teams play, man, and I talked to you about it in the pre-show, but between them, New England, and Pittsburgh, this offensive display is so gross, and yet we're seeing these teams get to 5 wins, 6 wins in the season. Good for the Raiders. They keep finding ways to win. They do have a tough schedule coming up, though.
That's for sure, and they're going to need to get a little bit more out of a rookie quarterback and Aiden O'Connell, who did just enough to get that team over the hump. The Jets, multiple opportunities to kind of sneak in the front door and steal a win. The Zach Wilson interception that you referenced from Robert Spillane, and, of course, the Hail Mary that made Zach Wilson look extremely athletic, evading pressure, and then Garrett Wilson and Tyler Conklin collide in the end zone, taking away what would have been a more improbable Jets win, trying to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. But as we do every Monday, we kind of kick things off with the good, the bad, and the ugly. And Billy, want to give you the honors in terms of highlighting the positive, because sometimes we have to laugh in this business to keep ourselves from crying.
Well, I saw we lined on 2 of them, so I'll go with the one we didn't, which was the Detroit offense and Detroit in general. Let's start with Dan Campbell. I mean, these 4th down decision-making, they were 4 for 5 for the game. He failed in that one in the first half. He went right back to it again, succeeded. I think you had a nice tweet that put out, which was 1 touchdown is better than 2 field goals. 7 is more than 6. And then he did it again to wrap up the game at the very end. Goff was phenomenal, 23 of 33, 10.1 yards per attempt. He finished 3rd in success rate, and the offense finished number 1 for the week going into Monday Night Football. They got 2 very talented backs right now, 200 yards rushing between Montgomery and Gibbs. And we've seen this throughout the year in the NFL. Sometimes the best thing that can happen for a team is a player misses a game. And when Montgomery missed that game against the Raiders, and you got to see what Jahmyr Gibbs could do on the ground and through the air, this Detroit team, I'll tell you what, going into Week 8, They were 10-1 to have the best record in the NFL. They're now down to 4.5-1. That schedule coming up, Chicago 2 times. They get Green Bay at home. They go to New Orleans, but they do so with extra prep. They get the Vikings twice, although Josh Dobbs, making his case for best player in the NFL. And
give him the MVP award with what he's doing right now in Minnesota.
a mix between Michael Vick and Patrick Mahomes. The guy's unbelievable. Costing us money every week. That's fine. And then they play Dallas. Detroit plays Dallas on the road. It's their toughest test for the remaining schedule. Detroit was very impressive to me yesterday, especially on the offensive end.
Yeah, look, it's a team that, we had high expectations for coming into the year. We weren't sure exactly how they were going to handle that target being placed squarely on the middle of their back, but they've gone out there and exceeded expectations, and I think you highlighting the aggressive nature of Dan Campbell, just pretty much saying, I don't give a shit. I'm going to do things my way, win or lose, and to have the backing of the organization, to have that level of confidence, it paid off. And if you kick the field goal there late with the way you hadn't been able to get off the field defensively against the Chargers, who knows? Justin Herbert could lead that team down the field and end up taking a win away from you. That game was an absolute battle in terms of what we saw in the betting market as well. We talked about it on Thursday's show a little bit in terms of price playing a huge role. Kudos to those folks who grabbed the push, at least with the Chargers at the top of the market, and for those folks who got out early laying the points with the Lions, one of the few games this weekend where CLV played a huge role in determining the outcome. I want to give credit to the Cleveland Browns and specifically Deshaun Watson. We've been extremely hard on him, and rightfully so. Has looked like a shell of himself, more or less shot putting the ball in terms of trying to stretch the field against opposing defenses, but really righted the ship. After throwing the early pick 6 to Kyle Hamilton, you look at that, and it's 7-0 Ravens before you even blink inside a minute into the game. Cleveland had been one of the sharper sides. We saw the 6.5s cleared out of the market, pretty much went off at the sharpest shops at a soft 6. You watch the first half and go, apparently professional bettors overestimated what this Browns offense and what they could do on the defensive side. Lo and behold, they're able to erase a 31-17 deficit. It's Watson finishing the game damn near perfect. We see flashes of what he can provide in terms of running the football as well to extend plays. And Billy, he actually did it while playing hurt. He wasn't 100% out there. Wasn't sure if he was going to pull himself out of the game, quite like Roger Dorn saying he took one of those in the knees last year and had to go out there and protect himself for the longevity of his career.
Watson was awesome. He was awesome in the fourth quarter. And Cleveland was really one of the sharper buys for pro bettors this offseason. We saw 8.5 minus 160 get taken, 8.5, all the way up to minus 180, and then some over 9s on the season win total. And this is kind of what we thought we would see throughout the year, especially when you consider David Njoku, Cooper, Elijah Moore. They're all playing a pivotal role. We saw that yesterday. And Cleveland's doing this without Nick Chubb. Jack Conklin got hurt first game of the year. There was no DeJuan Jones yesterday. That offensive performance was really fun to watch in that fourth quarter. But I will say this about this team, and obviously defense leads the way. That front four really got going in the second half, and we saw Myles Garrett put his stamp on that game. He became the 6th player ever to have 6 consecutive seasons with double-digit sacks. He joins a list of Reggie White, John Randall, Bruce Smith, Lawrence Taylor, DeMarcus Ware, and Jared Allen. They got aggressive in the offseason. They picked up Zadarius Smith, and it paid off here. The defense really only allowed 17 points in that game if you go through it. They had the pick 6, like you mentioned, Kyle Hamilton, and then the muffed punt they overcame at the end of the third quarter, where it put Baltimore right on about the 15-yard line. So this Cleveland team they got a big game next week. Need Deshaun Watson to play. But they're set up for a nice postseason if they can make it. They got to get there.
Yep, it's a great point, and we'll get to, actually, you know what? Rather than pick on the Ravens too much, I had them in, the bad or the ugly category a little bit later. I mean, I think when you dig a little bit deeper into some of those numbers, you mentioned the Browns' defense and how prolific they were. I mean, the Browns put forth a 178-106 edge in terms of the rushing game. Time of possession, held the ball for nearly 10 minutes more than Baltimore, and the Ravens just weren't able to hold things in place the way they needed to, and the Browns did so playing, you mentioned some of the other injuries. I mean, they finished that game without their most talented corner in Denzel Ward. Juan Thornhill leaves the game as well. It wasn't as though the Ravens were in tip-top shape with Ronnie Stanley and Marlon Humphrey leaving as well, but a massive win for the Browns, and to your point, we'll see if they're able to follow up some of that momentum next Sunday with a revenge game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. For anybody out there that wanted to eulogize the San Francisco 49ers amid their 3-game losing streak, that may have been a little bit premature. You look at what George Kittle was able to do, 3 catches, 116 yards. Christian McCaffrey, 142 total yards, albeit his streak of consecutive games with a touchdown coming to an end. But an absolutely dominant performance from the 49ers, beating a good Jaguars team 34-3. You saw glimpses of what this team could be on the defensive side with the bookend pass rushers and Nick Bosa and Chase Young being reunited. So much so that the Jags after the game said, quoting Trevor Lawrence, I think you've got to feel the pain and embarrassment of today. It's terrible. It's one of the worst games I've probably played in my career. We couldn't do anything right, but you got to flush it too. Credit to the 49ers reminding us why they're still one of the teams to beat in the NFC playoff picture.
Yeah, and they talked about this over their losing streak, and we've seen it in their playoff games when they come out to the stadium. They got the boom box going with Debo and Trent Williams leading the way, and there's just a different swagger with this team when those two are playing. They're routinely referred to as like the soul of the team. Purdy looked very comfortable, very confident, and we give him a lot of kudos, but Shanahan is just fantastic at getting his playmakers the ball consistently in space and letting them do elite things. Kyle Juszczyk was targeted multiple times in the past game too. They just, when they're going, they feel like the best team in football.
Their A game is as good as anybody else's. And when you look at San Francisco and you try and nitpick a little bit to figure out where their weakness can be, it's obviously in the defensive side of the ball, especially in their secondary. But if you're able to generate pressure, it becomes a moot point if quarterbacks are forced to get the ball out of their hand quickly. And I think the 49ers' inability to land somebody to bolster their secondary gets offset a little bit if Chase Young starts to scratch the surface on what he can be as one of the league's more talented pass rushers. So impressive display for sure for the 49ers, and they'll have a favorable game this coming week where they'll be a double-digit favorite against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. In terms of other positives you wanted to highlight, the floor is yours.
That was it. I had Detroit, I had San Francisco, and I had Cleveland, especially that second half. So if you want, we can move right into that. Start talking about the stuff that drives us crazy.
I do have to give props to one other team that came in with just one win on the season. And that would be the Arizona Cardinals.
Yep.
You and I joked, and as I've joked with Payne, if we have win totals that are going in different directions and those teams happen to play this year, I can guarantee you how that result is going to go. With an Atlanta Falcons over ticket, Arizona Cardinals under, there was never a doubt that Arizona was going to find a way to win this game outright, and it took the elusive running skills of Kyler Murray, evading multiple defenders, ran to his left, reversed back to his right, sprints up the field for a tremendous 13-yard gain that felt like it covered about 105 yards in actual space in that game on a 3rd and 10 run. Atlanta just can't contain him. Clearly, this offense looks a little bit different. They get Trey McBride involved, becoming the first tight end for the Arizona Cardinals to have more than 100 receiving yards in a game since 1989. Just look like a different football team. Look, we're going to get to the Falcons. That's one that's not going to avoid the firing squad here. But credit to Arizona, who look much more dynamic offensively with theoretically the face of their franchise back under center.
Murray's knee looked good. And you've been hearing from the organization there was a lot of talk going into the year that whether or not Kyler would even play, and they'd pick up all that contract. But that was not really coming from the organization. They seemed very confident in the direction they were going to go with Kyler, and he looked good. He looked good. He looked healthy. Good things to come for this Arizona team. Maybe not so much this year, but they're building something there. I wasn't the biggest Jonathan Gannon fan, but I might be turning on that.
He's gotten the team to fight, and for not only me, you, Payne, and the rest of our listeners sitting under 4.5, I don't feel as confident when you look at their upcoming schedule with some of the opportunities to make sure we get there. But who knows? Cooler heads could prevail in Arizona, and they may realize they need the draft capital there rather than trying to win 5-6 games and get thrust into NFL draft purgatory. Shout out to C.J. Stroud and the Houston Texans as well. Big win there, one of the sharpest positions we saw of the weekend. Goes from 7 early in the week, closes at 5, and the Houston Texans exceed odds makers' expectations. Stroud continues to put a stranglehold, at least in my opinion, on the Rookie of the Year. Noah Brown, exactly who we all thought would be the pick to click, 7 catches, 172 yards in the absence of Nico Collins. But from the good to the bad, I'm letting you kick things off.
Let's start with the Saints. specifically the defense. And I know Josh Dobbs played great yesterday, but you allowed 5.7 yards per play. It's just Dobbs. We saw what he did against Atlanta and the success he had, and it was all based on his legs. And you got to keep him in the pocket. You got to keep him contained. The Saints go into this game, and it's Dobbs' second week in the building. There was a NFL Network had him walking into the stadium, and someone had to point to him where the locker room was as he's walking in the stadium because he's got no idea where he's going. And there's no KJ Osborne. You lose Cam Akers from the previous week. Alexander Mattison goes down with a concussion, and Ty Chandler's running the ball, who I like. I like Ty Chandler. But in general, especially we saw it in the end of the half where Alontae Taylor was on contain and just takes a terrible angle and takes that game to 17-3 when it would have been 13-3. Maybe he had a chance to cash that first half under, but this Saints defense just consistently inconsistent. And I think when you look at the leadership of the Saints, it makes sense. You went from a team that was led by Sean Payton and Drew Brees to now one that has Dennis Allen, Pete Carmichael, Derek Carr, and now Jameis Winston. And that is the epitome of inconsistency, and we've just seen that from the Saints team all year. It's very frustrating watching them, and I'm sure as a fan, those fans have to be frustrated with this defense.
Look, thankfully for the Saints and Saints fans, they play in the worst division in football from top to bottom, so it doesn't matter how many games you lose when the Atlanta Falcons continue to shoot themselves in the foot over and over again. You're still able to maintain a divisional lead. Billy, I originally wanted to give credit to the Dallas Cowboys for their impressive performance, knowing that there was a little bit of sharp money that came in on the Giants, plus 17.5 leading up to kickoff of that game, but decided rather than give the Cowboys praise for beating up on a bottom feeder, I'd rather pick on the Giants instead. And the Cowboys, with that 40-0 Week 1 win against the Giants, follow it up with a 49-17 win against the Giants. 72-point margin was the Cowboys' largest in a sweep of NFC East opponents, topping their 66-point edge against Philadelphia way back in 1969. When we look at the Giants, they were outgained 368-27 in the first half. Absolutely incredible when you think about it. And look, Tommy DeVito's not an NFL quarterback. I'm not telling our listeners anything they don't already know. But somewhere along the way, I want to hold someone accountable for running an inside draw play to Saquon Barkley on 4th and goal from the 4-yard line. Brian Daboll and Kafka have to be beside themselves, but when you look at how this team has performed week in, week out, sure, it's a third-string quarterback, but at the same time, they look like a far cry for a team that was at least buttoned up last year when we had questions about the overall talent on that roster.
It feels like starting week 6 or 7, Daboll, the way he calls the game, it feels like he just quit. It feels like he's calling football games like he has no expectation of winning, and he's kind of taking his ball and going home. And it's disappointing. I'm sure there's going to be a 2 to 3 minute YouTube clip of all the faces Daboll makes on the sidelines as he's looking at his quarterbacks. But that organization, though, I'm shocked. I'm shocked with Daboll and Kafka, and I know they're dealing with maybe the worst O-line injury and worst O-line in the NFL. But these play calls, man, I don't know what he's doing. I really don't. It does feel like there's just a complete lack of effort on his part to be creative, and that's disappointing.
You just look, and this team doesn't really appear to be prepared week in, week out. You can understand if you're getting blown out. At the same time, you'd like to see a little bit more fight, and when one of the leaders of your team is fighting with the head coach on the sidelines, it's not a great look optically. How bad are things for the Giants? Well, they're going to be a double-digit underdog on the road to the Washington Commanders, a team that unloaded a lot of key pieces defensively going into things. But any other bad that you think is worth mentioning here before, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, that I have a couple of examples that I could put in the bad and the ugly, but at that point it really boils down to simply semantics.
Yeah, we both had this in the bad, and we don't spend much time on it, but Trevor Lawrence he's just not taking that next step. He looked so frazzled in the pocket yesterday. He finished 21st out of 27 quarterbacks in success rate. I know that this was the first time that we were able to see Bosa and Young on that San Francisco defensive line, but he just looks like he's out of sorts too often. And again, that's disappointing because we thought he was taking these next steps. But every time he gets 2 or 3 good performances, he comes back with one that just leaves you scratching your head and wondering, is this guy ever going to be a top 5 quarterback in the NFL? I don't think so. As of this point, no.
It's a lot of these things just leave you scratching your head over and over again, and I have no idea what to make of some of the things we see on a week in, week out basis, the increased data points. And you always want to give a lot of these guys the benefit of the doubt, but sometimes they tell you exactly who they're going to be, and at that point you have to take them at their word. So into the ugly we go, and look, I'll start with the Atlanta Falcons. Team is now 4-6. They've lost 3 straight in 6 of their past 8 games heading into their bye week. They've lost their last 3 games by a combined 10 points. Tyler Heineke, when he was out there, 8 of 15 passing for 55 yards and a touchdown. Desmond Ridder steps in when Heineke's hamstring goes kaput, goes 4 of 6 for 39 yards. They didn't throw past the sticks one time with Heineke out there against that vaunted Arizona Cardinals secondary. I mean, Arizona came into the game 23rd in yards per pass against the yards per attempt, against the pass. And Arthur Smith with this little gem. We're frustrated. Anybody would be when you come up short. We have to fix what's been our issues and find a way to get back in the win column. Well, you know what, Artie? You know what way to get back in the win column? Maybe try and force an opposing defense to actually respect some of your playmakers. You have a matchup advantage in Drake London, and good things happened when you threw downfield late in the game. It was just way too little, way too late.
I have some family in the Atlanta region, and the text message that I was sent last night went, Arthur Smith is fortunate we live in the 21st century, because if it was the 17th century, I would call for decapitation. So that is where we're at in Atlanta right now. 3.9 yards per play versus Arizona defense, 94 total passing yards. The weapons are there. I don't know. He's got to go. I think he's got to go. We'll see how the rest of the season finishes out, because this team has the pieces to be a solid team, to be a 9-win football team if they're just coached correctly. But that just, we're waiting for something that's just not going to happen, it feels like. And yeah, obviously that's going to hurt the win total over 8.5.
I think that's the most frustrating part. You can see the pieces there. You can see the opportunity. You get glimpses of what can happen when this team decides to take the governor off. And for the first time, I'll at least give them the silver lining. They used Bijan Robinson the right way, got one of their most electric playmakers involved. But other than that, just a full-blown, unmitigated disaster for what's unfolding with the Atlanta Falcons. So where else should we go in the ugly as we kind of try and encapsulate the week that was in the National Football League?
Me and you aligned on this one. I mean, we have to talk about the Patriots and what is going on with that franchise. If you saw the Kraft interview before the game, he looks like he is at his wit's end with maybe Belichick. There are some interesting tidbits coming out of the New England region about Mr. Belichick, and maybe his focus isn't entirely on football as it used to be. He's had some personal life changes. And it looks like a team that's just completely out of sorts, and it's been that way the whole season. Mac Jones, I mean, that was maybe the worst interception I've seen all year. And I'll tell you, before the season, we took just over 3,100 on his pass yards. And the lone concern was, will he get benched if he plays so poorly? And I think we're there. I don't know if he's going to start after the bye week. I would guess not, based on them pulling him at the end of a game. When you're pulling your quarterback on the final drive of the game, what are you doing? I mean, I don't understand. Even that decision, I'm like, look, he hasn't played well, but you're going to put in someone fresh right as you need your drive to score a touchdown? Like, what are you doing? I don't know.
I mean, you could have put Mac out there to run the fake spike. I mean, he may or may not have thrown the football to one of his receivers, smashed in between 6 guys in white jerseys out there, and hoped that there was somehow going to be a little bit of a positive. But alas, this is what the Patriots are. This is what they've become. I don't think Bailey Zappi's the answer. We know Mac Jones isn't. And this team would be best served to continue to lose out and look to get a franchise quarterback number 1 overall in the draft. The $100 million question then would remain, would Bill Belichick be the man in charge? But maybe it's firing Bill Belichick, the general manager, and allowing Bill Belichick just to coach with some of the players that are there. But not what Patriot fans anticipated, losing a game in Frankfurt, Germany, 10-6 that they had multiple opportunities to win. Just leaves you scratching your head, to say the least. You can follow Billy on social media at Watt_05. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Billy, like we do here on Monday mornings, we like to see how the betting market has overadjusted, overreacted, and use some of the knee-jerk capabilities. Of course, the deeper we get into the season, it's a little bit of a different dynamic, so you don't have a ton of movement. But at the same time, one of the marquee games next weekend, Thursday night, I'll see the Ravens playing host to the Cincinnati Bengals. The Ravens were a 3-point favorite on the look-ahead number. That number now, depending on where you shop, 3.5 to 4. Some injuries playing a role. But you know what? From a situational standpoint, it's almost set up perfectly with the Bengals coming in off a loss, the Ravens a convincing win against the Browns. Instead, both teams, I'm not going to say desperate, but clearly needing a win, knowing how tightly contested the AFC North is. Cincinnati 5-4, the Ravens sitting at 7-3.
Massive game for the AFC North, massive game for the AFC playoff picture in general. There were actually some 2.5 minus 20 numbers floated before the week on Wednesday that got gobbled up pretty quick on Baltimore. Baltimore usually shows very well at home. This number, though, is, I don't think 4.5 would stay. I think 4.5 is probably going to get taken, depending on the injury situation, though. We got to see what's going on with T. Higgins. Baltimore tends to play Cincinnati pretty well. It'll be interesting. Like you said, it would have been much better if Baltimore had finished off Cleveland. It might have been a nice look at Cincinnati here, but I think this number is probably going to stay right around this area. I can't see 4.5 staying in the market, and I think 3 is going to get laid. So I think this 3.5 soft 4 market's probably going to stay there.
I'm kind of right there with you. I think from a situational side, there's not the intangible angle worth exploiting. Not to say a team would be flat or overlooking a divisional opponent, but you're going to want to monitor the injury report. You mentioned T. Higgins ruled out rather early for this past week's game against the Houston Texans with that hamstring that he aggravated apparently in practice because he looked fresh as a daisy out there against the Buffalo Bills. But that's not the only major injury. Trey Hendrickson also goes down late for the Cincinnati Bengals. We're going to want to monitor his status on a short week because without him, the pass rush really suffers, and there was no Sam Hubbard this past weekend contributing to Devin Singletary, carrying the ball for 30 times, putting up 150 yards, something I don't think we've seen since he was a member of the Owls playing down there at Payne's neck of the woods in lovely Boca. For FAU. The Commanders were an 8-point favorite. That number has ballooned out to 10. We see Washington fight tooth and nail, getting the cover in the Pacific Northwest against the Seahawks in the 29-26 defeat. But this has more, in my opinion, to do with the Giants looking completely inept than it does Washington. Although credit to the Commanders. They've gone out there and shown fight in each of the last 2 weeks when it would have been easy to quit, given all the pieces they offloaded at the deadline.
What's sad is I think that the same groups who took 17.5 are probably going to scoop 10.5 here if it gets there.
Look, if you tell me Matt Barkley gets the start instead of Tommy DeVito, it's a little bit of a different handicap. I will say that much.
Yeah, and Daboll maybe will attempt some throws. And yeah, Washington laying double digits in a 2023 NFL football game was not something I thought I'd see, especially when they sold off at the trade deadline. But yeah, I think 10.5 is going to get taken here. I think we're going to probably sit around 9.5, 10 the rest of the week. One that I wanted to talk about was the total in Arizona and Houston. Open 46.5, and we've seen this thing jump all the way out to 49. And I think it makes a lot of sense when you consider what Stroud is doing over in Houston right now and how Kyler looked in that offense. He looked fresh for Arizona. So I think that move is more indicative of that's going to stay there. I don't see we're going to get a big buyback there at 49. Now, if this got up a little outrageous, 50, 51, I could see a little buyback. But at 46.5, 47, that was a clear buy on the over.
And we talk about the importance of key numbers all the time, 47 being one that's among the utmost importance. You did see slight buy at least a few minutes ago, albeit only at 1 or 2 books from the 49 down to 48.5. We'll see exactly where that goes, but I couldn't agree more when you look at the way these two teams are and how they're going to be priced in the market. That looking for a track meet with Kyler Murray back under center, Houston still having some questions defensively, and the Texans, quite frankly, in a bit of their own sandwich spot after back-to-back wins and probably against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, going on the road, beating the Bengals, and then what could amount to a huge divisional game next week against the Jacksonville Jaguars, all things to keep in mind. Cowboys, this is much a byproduct of Dallas looking great, Carolina struggling against the Bears on Thursday night. The Cowboys moved through a secondary key number for their trip to Charlotte from -9 out to -11.
Woof, there's some ugly games this upcoming week, and that's one of them where you're probably thinking it's going to be Carolina or pass here, especially with the extra 3 days of prep. We saw Dallas in a spot like this early in the year against Arizona off a big win against the Jets. They played Arizona. They got beat outright. I don't know if Carolina's coaching staff is up there with Arizona's right now, but that number's certainly enticing at 11.
Hey, look, the Cowboys have done this once before. They stubbed their toe on a little bit of a unique week against the Arizona Cardinals. Not a group immune to coming up a touch short, knowing that they'll have their big game on Thanksgiving on a short week just a few days later. This could look like a game where they go out there, do just enough to get the win, and move on with their business. And last but not least, the game that we saw a little bit of a move here for a team that comes into this contest off a win. But Seattle was a 3.5-point favorite on the road against the Rams in the look-ahead market. Now below that key to 2.5. Signs pointing to either the return of Matthew Stafford or maybe the debut of Carson Wentz wearing Rams colors next Sunday.
Yeah, agree with that move 100%. Seattle just seems off, especially on the offensive end. They do just enough at the end of these games. They have these big drives, but there's lapses during the game where they just seem like they don't really have an identity or they don't know what they want to do. And Geno's not really the quarterback you can run an offense with like that. So we'll see. We'll see where this number goes. I think the threes are going to be gone, though. Don't see them coming back.
I'm right there with you. I think getting to a field goal, you'll see those immediately snatched up should a book or two happen to get to that point. We know the familiarity between these two divisional foes. We saw week 1 this year, the Rams, one of the sharper sides, they go up on the road, the Pacific Northwest, a game that opens 6, closes 4.5, and the Rams win convincingly 27-13. We'll see if Seattle can right the ship. But to echo your sentiments, I've seen a lot of the same things that leave me scratching my head with a Seahawks team that I expected a little bit more of. And unfortunately for Seattle, if they're not going to go out there and perform on the defensive side, I don't think they have the kind of offensive firepower that they can lean on Geno and company to put up crooked numbers each and every week. This is normally the portion of the program where we get a little good injury update from the good Doc Deepak. Unfortunately, had some commitments that kept him from contributing this week, so we'll see if we can get a couple of injury updates for all the fantasy players and the bettors of all ability levels going into the weekend in terms of when their favorite players may or may not return to action. So, Billy, let's get into the Monday Night Football game that we have on the docket tonight, where it's the Buffalo Bills, a full touchdown favorite. Total in this game, 47.5, and we've seen a little bit of back and forth. Buffalo opened as much as a 9-point favorite in this spot. Number got down to a soft 7. The general public backing the Bills in this spot, tying them into moneyline parlays, teasers, and a lot of the exotics. There has been a little bit of a battle on the total as well. Got as low as 46.5. We're now back at 47. And the Broncos come into this contest off a bye week in Week 9. They snapped a 16-game losing streak versus the Chiefs in Week 8. The first win against their division rival since 2015 when Peyton Manning was under center. And you do a little bit of reading around this game, and Sean Payton has adopted a somewhat unique travel schedule for the Broncos, saying that his team planned to spend parts of 4 days and 3 nights in Buffalo, a beautiful, luxurious destination in early November. If you're looking for a chance to unwind and relax a little bit, team left Saturday night, 2 days before the game, which has been Payton's custom for his games when his teams are traveling across 2 time zones, and instead of flying back directly after the game tonight, they'll actually stay in Buffalo and head back on Tuesday, hoping that it helps their energy levels for their contest next week. When we look at the Bills, they enter off a 24-18 loss against the Bengals in prime time, where the offense unfortunately stalled for extended stretches. But this is a Bills team who's benefited immensely playing at home, averaging 31 points per game in Western New York, compared to a shade more than 14 when they play away from Buffalo. If the season ended right now, Buffalo would be on the outside of the playoff race in the AFC. They haven't missed the postseason since 2018. Meanwhile, the Broncos under in 8 straight primetime games with an average closing total of 45. The average points scored in those contests, a shade under 30, while the Bills will look to break some primetime futility of their own right. They own the longest streak in the league of primetime ATS failures. When you look at this game, Billy, we can take it a variety of different ways, whether it's the Broncos offense against the Bills defense or the Bills offense against the Broncos defense. Which is the most fascinating matchup that you want to see tonight in your neck of the woods?
I think the most fascinating matchup is going to be Buffalo on offense versus Denver defense. And I don't think it's as much about Buffalo on offense, but it's more about what is this Denver defense now. They showed better in their 2 games against the Chiefs, and then the Green Bay game, which was sandwiched in the middle of those 2 games. Obviously, we don't think much of Green Bay's offense, and Mahomes had his
nor should we, by the way.
Bye. You know, we heard all these rumors about a new offense and new look, and they were dreadful. They've been dreadful all year. And then in game 2, you know, Mahomes had this flu game or didn't feel great, so we have to factor that in. But we've seen the improvements. Obviously, Brandon Browning is back, and he's been leading the way since he returned from injury in the Green Bay game, but they really kind of let him loose in the second Kansas City game. Justin Simmons refers to him as a little Von Miller. He's got a same kind of build as Von and can explode like Von. It should be noted, though, I agree that Denver's defense has been better, but that 3-week performance, they only finished 16th in defensive EPA. They were 6th in rush EPA, but they were 27th in overall success rate defense in weeks 6 through 8. And so I have some questions about, are they really trending towards the top 12 defense, or is this just them getting out of the 32 spot down to like mid-20s here? They have some pieces. Cornerback Jaquan McMillan has played really well in the slot. And, again, Justin Simmons and cornerback Patrick Surtain have spoke very highly of him. But I think this is the big test for Denver's defense. They obviously had that familiarity with the Chiefs, and we saw that Packers performance. If Buffalo does play tempo and spread it out, can Denver match them? That's the question again, and we'll get into the Buffalo offense, but it's a little bit of a coin flip if Buffalo's going to do that, but that's how I'm looking at this Denver defense right now.
And when you talked about tempo, I mean, we saw flashes of it against the Bucs, and it paid dividends. And then Sean McDermott decided, hey, look, this is working too effectively. Let's slow it down and protect my defense. And it almost ends up costing them in the Thursday night football game, a contest where you never thought the outcome was going to be in doubt, but you punt from plus territory not once but twice, thinking, okay, Baker Mayfield and company aren't going to be able to move the ball. I mean, I look at everything going on with Buffalo offensively, and while I know they're not all sitting in a circle singing Kumbaya with each other away from the facility, is this a group that's going to consistently keep their foot on the accelerator and put up points? Because to your, what you were talking about with this Denver defense, there are still some questions that have to be answered for the Denver stop unit overall.
I don't know if you saw this, but newcomer Latavius Murray called a players-only offensive meeting this week for Buffalo, which is usually a death sentence for a team when you hear players-only meetings. McDermott spoke he was very impressed with the accountability of the players, but you bring up a great point about, will McDermott and Dorsey put a governor on this Bills offense again, especially when you consider the defensive injury situation, which we'll get to in a bit. But they had another weird Zoom press conference after the Cincinnati loss where Dorsey said, getting into a rhythm is really just about getting first downs. He said they stopped going up-tempo versus Cincinnati because of field position, and they want to remain a balanced and two-dimensional offense in which they have to execute better. This blame, it can't just be put on McDermott and Dorsey. Josh has not played great. He is definitely fixing in on Diggs and Kincaid too often right at the snap. But I got to say, he seems like he can't even get into a groove in this McDermott-style, slow-paced, very balanced offense. And what's frustrating is they're actually running the ball really well. It just seems to be like when they choose to do so is not the right time. Like they're third in run block win rate, they're third in adjusted line yards, they're third in rush EPA offense, and they're number one in rush success rate. It just feels like the times that they are calling their runs is poor, and it's throwing things out of whack, and it feels very choppy. So I think that's the frustration of the fan base, and the coaching staff starting to feel the heat with where they're going. What is the identity of the Bills offense? And that leaves a lot of questions for this game.
And I think, we keep hoping that they're going to get answered, and they haven't been. I mean, you look at Josh Allen, you mentioned it. I mean, this is a guy who struggled connecting on the deep ball, just 3 of 20, passing 20-plus air yards since week 6. We can say it's attributed to the injury. There are always a variety of factors. The turnovers have continued to plague this group, and we'll see if those things get rectified going forward against the Broncos defense. To your point, that's improving, but nowhere near the elite level caliber defense we saw winning Super Bowls with Peyton Manning under center. Now, on the other side of the ball, Buffalo's defense looks like an absolute mash unit, and you can go through the laundry list of players that aren't there. Add Micah Hyde and Christian Benford to the list for guys that won't be available tonight. And with Benford being ruled out, Tre'Davious White on IR, no Micah Hyde. I mean, this is a Bills team that's playing without both their first cornerback, their second cornerback, their fourth cornerback, and Kyer Elam, who's also on IR. But it's a Denver Broncos team that, against Kansas City, wanted to run the ball first and foremost. Sean Payton's no idiot. He knows he wants to protect his defense by shortening the game, taking the ball out of Russ's hands, at least to some extent. But you do wonder if there's going to be the occasional deep shot or two, getting Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton involved, knowing that this Bills secondary leaves a lot to be desired, like most levels of this Bills defense, just given the rash of injuries.
Let's start with this injury situation for Buffalo. So you mentioned the cornerbacks. The Rasul Douglas trade could not have come at a better time. It's possible we might see Josh Norman tonight, which scares the living crap out of me.
Get excited, baby. The Josh Norman experience. Add another chapter.
We saw them. They're trying to get creative. Last week when they played Cincinnati, when they went dime personnel, they basically moved Jordan Poyer up at linebacker. And what they did was they moved Cam Lewis to safety along with Taylor Rapp when Micah Hyde was in and out of the game. And so they're either going to choose to have backups at 3 positions, which would be both safeties and a linebacker, or they're going to keep Poyer at safety and only have backups at 2 positions, the linebacker and the safety, when they're in dime personnel. This defense is trending as a bottom 5 pass defense, and obviously the injuries are why. When you look at week 6 through 9. So they had the injury debacle in London against Jacksonville. They lost Milano. They lost Daquan Jones. They didn't have Trey White after the Miami game. They're 30th in defensive EPA. They're 30th in dropback EPA. They're slightly above average on run defense. But again, these opponents were the Giants with Tyrod, the New England offense, who, by the way, dropped 29. I don't know if anyone watched the Indianapolis game yesterday, but that New England offense dropped 29 on Buffalo. They played Tampa Bay and Cincinnati. They have played the easiest schedule of opposing offenses this year. Obviously, you have to factor in the Cincy numbers are a little deflated due to earlier in the year. But this is really concerning for Buffalo. I don't know that Denver's offense through the air is where they can really exploit Buffalo. You have a big body receiver in Cortland Sutton. He seems to be the guy that Russ leans to. They've talked a lot about prop guys know this because they're always following. Marvin Mims Jr. is talked about every single week getting the ball more. And Payton even said, he was asked about it, and he said, it's a good question. It's certainly a fair question. How do we get Marvin more touches, and how do we incorporate him more into what we're doing offensively? I'm sitting here looking at a notepad with his jersey number on it in front of me. That's our job as coaches. We really believe we have a good, young, talented player. Obviously, there are other players on our offense that deserve the same type of attention relative to play design.
This is incredible. I didn't read this quote.
And then he goes, we're going to work our tails off to move that needle where he's getting opportunities, not only in the passing game. He just does a lot of things well, and he's really good with the ball in his hands. Sean Payton has been saying this since like week 3, and Mims snaps have just gone downhill. So I don't know what he's doing during the week that is getting him in the doghouse. But I agree with you. I think we're going to see a run-heavy game plan. Payton mentioned that the Bills are, and I haven't verified this, he said they're 33-1 with McDermott and Allen when they win the turnover battle together. And what's the best way to ensure you win the turnover battle? You run the football and you take the ball out of Russ's hands when he's in the pocket. Russ has been good throwing the football, but the strip sacks have been an issue. And there's less chance of a fumble if you're pounding that rock with Javonte Williams. Todd, I think you have some good notes on Mike McGlinchey's performance this year.
Yeah, look, this offensive line has been a real liability, and you mentioned taking the ball out of Russ's hands. We saw that against the Chiefs. 30 touches for Javonte Williams, marking a career high, and clearly this backfield by committee while Williams was returning from injury seems to be a thing of the past. When we look at Russ, he got sacked 6 times. Jeez, easy for me to say it on Monday morning. Sacked 6 times on his 19 dropbacks against Kansas City. I mean, McGlinchey was brought in to try and help solidify that group. He's close to setting a career high in total pressures and sacks allowed halfway through the season. His career highs gave up 6 sacks and 39 pressures. Well, he's given up 5 sacks and 31 pressures already. So you can understand the lack of confidence that Sean Payton has in Russell Wilson sitting in the pocket, and it just hasn't been the interceptions. Those have been minimal. It's the fact that Russ treats the football like it's a loaf of bread, and it's extremely easy for defenders to knock it out of his hands and to force a little fumble or two here or there. So clearly there's at least an identifiable path for Denver to go out there and compete in this game. The question I have, Billy, is if they find themselves down early, should Buffalo, say, take the opening kickoff and use tempo, do the Broncos have the ability to battle from behind, or if they're going to be the side in this game, they have to play from the catbird seat and kind of lead right from the opening kickoff? They
clearly are the side. You mentioned it at the top that Denver +8 and +7.5 is very sharp. So they clearly are the side at this point. In 6.5, there's going to be a difference of opinion, like there always is around these key numbers. They have to keep this game close. And I think Sean Payton knows that. I don't think you want this Bills pass rush to pin their ears back and get after you. They're 3rd in pass rush win rate. They're 7th in adjusted sack rate. They can get after the quarterback. Through all the injuries, there's one thing they can do really well, and that's get to the quarterback. So they're going to have to keep this game close. I talked to some guys who were interested in the under in this game, under 47.5, 48. And I can see that being the total play if Payton decides he's going to run the football this game. And if he can get out 4 to 5 yards a carry, we're going to see a lot of runs this game. I just don't know that they're going to be able to do that. There is something else to keep an eye on, and that's the weather. And the forecaster or the meteorologist for the Bills came out this morning and said it's going to be a little gusty, 10 to 20 mile per hour winds for the game. It's going to be about 45 degrees. So that leans itself even more to Denver probably trying to establish the run here, even though Buffalo is just so beat up in the secondary. You said there might be some deep shots. I can see that. Russ throws a really nice moon ball. He's always thrown a really nice moon ball. So we'll see. I don't take this as the offense, though, that can get down 14-0 and then all of a sudden they got to catch up. I really don't.
Yeah, there's no doubt the blueprint is there for Denver in terms of a path, and they have to make sure that they stick to it, playing with the lead. Call me Captain Obvious makes it significantly easier to cover when you're a touchdown underdog in hostile territory. When we look at the total, it has been interesting. I know this is widely circulated, so you wonder when the market will correct itself. But we've seen 31 primetime games so far this year. The under has gone 24-7 with that Jets game coming in under the total last night. So points at a premium across the NFL. It's been even more pronounced in primetime. We'll see what transpires tonight in Western New York. Are you going to find yourself there jumping through tables? Will you be part of the tailgate festivities for this fine football game?
No, stuck in the office. I decided to go to the Giants game earlier this year, and that made me never want to go to another Bills game the rest of my life. So I am taking a season off from Bills from any more Bills games. We'll see. We'll see what this offensive performance looks like. That's really the big question, and it's going to decide the total. It's going to decide the side is which Bills offense are we going to see? Are they going to let him loose? Are they going to let Allen loose? You also got to remember this Bills offense is extremely healthy, and we've been extremely healthy all year. So the fact we can't get this going with the health we've had in our offense and being in some negative game states because the defense has really struggled with these injuries it's just so concerning as a Bills fan. And again, it leaves you to think that, it's really a coin flip tonight in terms of what offense we're going to see. We're going to know pretty quick. If they come out right away and they have Kincaid out there and Diggs and Shakir, and we see tempo, and we can see it consistently, not for 1 or 2 drives, but through the first half, that's a good sign for the Bills. But if you see us go back to, 2nd and 6 runs and just putting ourselves in these 3rd and 4, 3rd and 5 situations, I think Denver's going to be live tonight.
Big picture, when you look at the Bills' season outlook, I mean, their schedule gets to be an absolute gauntlet going forward. Are you optimistic that they can figure things out, or are there legitimate reasons to be concerned before we officially put a bow on this one?
I think it's twofold. Am I optimistic? No. Do I think Bills have the talent to play games in the high 20s, low 30s and win football games? Yes. Will they choose to take that route? So far, there's no reason to suggest they will. So my concern with Buffalo is we have the potential to play these high-scoring games, and that's where we're going to win these games. I'm afraid the coaching staff is just not going to allow that to happen. You mentioned the schedule. It's brutal moving forward. Buffalo's about to pick them to make the playoffs coming into this game. So, and the the games yesterday did not go well for Buffalo playoff hunt hopes. I don't know, Todd. I keep flip-flopping. I've never been too optimistic about this team this year, but there have been some games where I look back and I'm like, there's no way this team certainly can't compete for a Super Bowl, but can we get to the playoffs? I think there's a good chance we get to 7-4 if we can take care of Denver and the Jets. And if you are maybe a little negative on Buffalo, that might be a good buy point to them not making the playoffs at that 7-4 mark. But they got to get past these two, and these two are no gimmies.
When you look at the AFC, it is really going to be an absolute grind for teams to try and earn victories to put themselves in a position to make it to the postseason, and we'll see exactly what we get out of Buffalo tonight. Meanwhile, on the flip side, if Denver wins, suddenly you might be talking about the Broncos being a little bit of a dark horse candidate to figure things out and find themselves in the mix fighting for one of those wild card spots. You can follow Billy on social media. That's Watt_05. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly for the podcast, all things Bet the Board at Bet the Board Pod. Payne will be back with us on Wednesday when we break down a little bit of college football with Brad Powers and continue to keep the train on the tracks there. The NFL Thursday show, as always, regularly scheduled programming. And Billy, can't thank you enough for stepping to the hot seat, breaking down a team on full display tonight in primetime that you know all too well. And we'll see exactly what unfolds as we sit here right now. The Bills actually taking a small wave in the market from a 7 flat out to a juice 7. Let's see if the next move is to 7.5 with some public support, or it's just a little bit of a setup for professional bettors to get the best of the numbers should they want to back the Broncos here, plus a full touchdown.
I don't think it's a setup, and the only reason why is I'm looking also at next week's lines. And before we started the pod, Circa and a couple other sports books had Buffalo down to 6.5 at home against the Jets, and those numbers have just been bumped back up to 7. So it seems like a complete buy on Buffalo here in this week's matchup and in next week's matchup. I mean, if this gets to 8, though, I think you're going to see another wave of Broncos money. 7 feels right. 7 feels like the right number here.
Oh, always interesting to watch the cat and the mouse.
No doubt.
Cat and mouse game, especially on standalone football. Best of luck to all of you, our loyal listeners, wherever your investments take you. And like I said, we'll be back with you on Wednesday for a little college football discussion. Payne Insider and Brad Powers back in the saddle, and hopefully we will see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.